I'm Elizabeth, a literary princess. If you are new here, welcome. I'm a 6-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have another Victober video for you. So last year I made a video that listed all of the Victorian literature that I'd read, or at least that I could remember reading. So I thought that it would be kind of interesting to give like an update and talk about the Victorian literature that I have read within the past year. So from October of last year, 2023, to October of this year, 2024. So I have read 16 pieces of Victorian literature that were new to me. I also reread several, but we're not going to talk about them. Some of them are short stories, some of them are novels, most of them are novels. One nonfiction in there. So, let's jump in. So the first book that I read was The Athelings, or The Three Gifts by Margaret Oliphant, and this was one that I read for Victober last year. This was originally serialized in Blackwood's magazine from June of 1856 to June of 1857, and then appeared as a three-volume novel. This tells the story of the Atheling family, mainly the three oldest siblings, Agnes, Marion, and Charlie. Agnes is a writer. At the beginning of the book, she gets a book published, and this starts a series of events that kind of puts them into society with this higher class of people. There is a whole issue with inheritance and potentially illegitimate children, and it's a whole thing. I enjoyed it a lot, but it was very long and I had to read it online because there is no print edition that I know of. The next one that I read was for my George Eliot project, and this was a short story, Brother Jacob, which was published in 1864, but actually written in 1860. And I did not like it. You could tell that it was like an earlier work that got published later. It wasn't as good as some of her others. I also just don't think she's very good with short stories generally, but that's my opinion. I do have a whole video on this if you would like to hear more. So the next three I'm going to talk about all together because they are from the same series and I've read them all right in a row. This is The Executor, The Rector, and The Doctor's Family by Margaret Oliphant. They are the first three works in the Chronicles of Carlingford. The Executor and The Rector are short stories. The Doctor's Family is a novel or a novella, depending on which you want to call it. All of these were published in Blackwood's magazine in 1861. And they kick off our story of Carlingford. And I did really enjoy them. The Executor was not my favorite, but it was still good. Like, I still enjoyed it, and it is very important to read for some context for the Doctor's Family. And it was great to see the start of Carlingford. You get introduced to a lot of major characters, and it was just a lot of fun. We then finally got to one I have a physical copy of. Yay! This was another one for the George Eliot project, Felix, Holt the Radical. This is set during the Reform Act of 1832. Following several characters, mainly Felix Holt of the title, Harold Transome, who is a nobleman running for Parliament, and Esther Leon, who is the daughter of a dissenting minister. I really enjoyed this. This was originally published in 1866, so between Romola and Middlemarch, and you can see where Eliot is leading up to a lot of the themes that she looks at in Middlemarch. I actually think this is way better paced and plotted than Middlemarch. I will say, though, the characters are not quite as memorable, but I did really like this one. Next up is more Margaret Oliphant. There's a lot of Oliphant here, okay? I really like her. This is the Perpetual Curate, which is the fifth work in the Chronicles of Carlingford, originally serialized in Blackwood's from June 1863 to September 1864, and then put out in 3 volumes in 1864. This is following the Perpetual Curate of St. Roch's, Frank Wentworth, and some stuff that happens to him. It really builds off a lot of stuff that you see set up in The Rector. But again, I love Margaret Oliphant. This was great fun. It was also the last one I had to read in the series because I read them horribly out of order. So now I can say I have read all of the Chronicles of Carlingford. And then we have more Margaret Oliphant. This is The Ways of Life. This is a collection of 2 novellas that was put out in 1897. The novellas are Mr. Sandford, which was originally put out in 1888, and The Strange Story of Mr. Robert Dalyell, originally published in 1892. So Mr. Sandford is the story of an artist who is realizing his work is not selling anymore. The Strange Story of Mr. Robert Dalyell is certainly a strange story. I'm not even going to tell you anything about it. Just pick it up. I really enjoyed it a lot. I liked both of these. I liked The Strange Story better. It was very interesting. And saying anything about what happens will spoil it. So just do yourself a favor, go read that. It's fun. Next up was the final George Eliot project read. This is The Impressions of Theophrastus Such. I hated this. I hated it. So it is a collection of fictional essays written by a fictional guy named Theophrastus Such, but it doesn't qualify as fiction. I am very salty about this. If you want to hear me rant, you can go watch my whole video on it, but I did not like this at all. I would not recommend it. Although I guess if you're looking for something that plays with form for Katie's challenge this Victober, it certainly plays with form by being told in a series of essays like this, but also it sucks, so don't pick it up. Just my opinion. Next up is one that I do own a copy of, but I lent it to my mother because I enjoyed it so much that I thought she should read it. This is Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I had wanted to read this last Victober and I didn't, so I was happy to finally get to it toward the beginning of this year. This was originally published in 1874 and is one of Thomas Hardy's first really successful novels. It's telling the story of Gabriel Oak, a farmer, and Bathsheba Everdeen, who he is in love with, and just everything that goes on with them. This was a really good one. I highly recommend it. I thought it was happy. It's Thomas Hardy. It's never happy. So just know that going into it. Next up, we have some nonfiction. This is an autobiography by Anthony Trollope. This was first published in 1883 after Trollope's death, and it talks about his writing process, his books, how he went about writing them. It talks about his childhood. He does give spoilers for a lot of the books, including, most notably to me, because I haven't read it, was The Last Chronicle of Barsetshire. So do be aware of that if you pick this up. I did really enjoy this though. It was fun to learn about his process. I was reading this to kind of compare in my dissertation with Margaret Oliphant's autobiography, and it was quite helpful for that. Now we're getting into the ones that I've read pretty recently and so I've talked about within the last few months. And this is The Moors and the Fens by Charlotte Riddle. This was Riddle's 4th book, published in 1858, and it tells the story of a young woman named Mina who is born in the Scottish Highlands and must move to London after her family, after the death of her father and the kind of loss of their money. And the story of her marriage with a guy whose name I cannot remember, but who's kind of like an impoverished upper class gentleman. meh. It's very meh. Very kind of all over the place. It felt, you can tell it's an early novel. Wasn't a huge fan of it, but it was interesting to see how she would later develop. And it was interesting because the main character, Mina, is a writer herself. We have the Victober group read, The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This was first published in 1864 and tells the story of Isabel Gilbert, the wife of a country doctor who is very dissatisfied with her life because it is not like the novels. Relatable. I loved this. I had a great time with it. I think all of you reading it for Victober this year are going to love it. I've said that before, but really it's so good. It is kind of a reimagining of Madame Bovary, but better because I hated Madame Bovary. So yeah. This was Braddon's kind of first attempt at more serious literature. So before this, she had been writing sensation novels and penny dreadfuls. This was her attempt to write something higher, and she is kind of taking on the criticisms of sensation fiction and calling them out in both Isabel herself with her reading and also with the character of Sigismund Smith, who is a sensation novelist and who, if you've been watching my Victober videos, you know I adore. The next three I literally just wrapped up in a video that I filmed earlier today. So this first one is New Grub Street by George Gissing. This was published in 1891 and is looking at the literary lives of several characters in the 1880s. This is fantastic. Highly, highly recommend it. We then have another Mary Elizabeth Braddon with The Lady's Mile, published in 1866. Which features the return, very, very briefly, of Sigismund Smith and tells the story of the marriages of two women, Lady Cecil Chudley and Florence Crawford. I was not a big fan of this one. I thought that it is not as well plotted or as interesting or as fun as Braddon's other works, and Sigismund Smith should have been in it more. That's my feelings on it. And then finally, book number 16 is The Uninhabited House by Charlotte Riddle, first published in 1875 in a magazine. I think it was Routledge magazine. I was right, it is Routledge magazine. This is a supernatural haunted house story and is so, so fun. Cannot recommend it enough. Great for the Halloween season if you're wanting to pick something spooky up for Victober. Excellent book. So glad that I read it. Kind of wish I'd waited until Victober to read it because, you know, October spooky, but the end of September is like kind of spooky season, so it's fine. Those are the 16 pieces of Victorian literature that I have read in the past year. Whew. Although, God, not as hoof as when I did the what Victorian literature I've read in my whole life, because that was a lot and my shelves were ransacked, although it was great fun. So let me know down in the comments below, have you read any of these? What did you think of them? What Victorian literature have you read in the past year? If you are interested, I do have the link to the list on List Challenges that is the updated version of what Victorian literature I have read. So you can go through and click and see how many we have in common. Let me know down in the comments below which ones. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon for another Victober video. Bye.